everybody to our webinar today, the Accounts Payable Automation and the Talent War, how this impacts you. Our host today is Dan Andrew, the Senior Vice President with Corcentric. Dan has over 30 years experience in this area of finance and technology. He works with some of the world's largest organizations to help them configure innovative payable solution that delivers an ROI as soon as possible. Just a little bit of housekeeping for today. On the right-hand side of your screen, there's a QA panel. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in there. If we can't answer your call or your question at the end of this call, someone from Corcentric will get back to you as soon as possible. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dan. I'm looking at our attendee list, and it keeps growing and growing. So we're going to have a packed crowd for you today.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mike, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to talk a lot about accounts payable automation and the talent war, how this is impacting you. So we have a lot of slides to go through and a lot of information that hopefully you'll find very beneficial in your career and much of what is happening in the industry today. If you think about, we get started here, the rate of change is no longer linear, it's more geometric. So when things move at a geometric pace, new technologies and processes and responsibilities inevitably become part of the change that you have to deal with. Some people will say that when something is 1% of the way there, that sounds like it's a long way to go before it reaches 100%, when in fact, it's actually about 6 years. And the way that works is it doubles every year. So from 1% to 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, by the time you hit that 6th year, you're at 100%. If another technology is maybe 25% of the way there, within 2 years, the way that we're experiencing rate of change, the next year it'll be 50, and the following year it's 100% penetration. So we are seeing in accounts payable a dramatic change in terms of speed, and it's affecting the organizations. And as a matter of fact, it's affecting the talent pool too, because when you look at the resources and those changes, what's happening is we're noticing that many of our clients that migrate from a cost center to a profit center, what happens is the talent pool continues to address additional capabilities and requirements. In other words, maybe those line workers today get moved to knowledge workers tomorrow. And what happens with that is the analysis that they are needing and requiring is sometimes a different skill set. Sometimes budgetary requirements are issues where financial leaders are looking to improve their team. Sometimes they have the right resources, but it's just a matter of training or perhaps restructuring. But either way, at the end of the day, the talent pool continues to be an area that needs to help with this change that's happening so fast. If you think about today, I'll just give you one example before we jump into this. Maybe as an organization, what would happen if you could tell every time a purchase order was sent, you could tell systematically when cash was going to leave the door? When you look at forecasting and cash management, some areas are very easy to forecast than others. Payroll, rent, utilities, those are all very static type expenses that are pretty easy to forecast. In the payables area, when you're buying raw materials or certain items, those are somewhat unpredictable. So if you can learn over time when a purchase order is sent, and you can track it through the receipt, the invoice, and ultimately the payment, you can now go to your treasurer or your CFO and say, I can help the organization determine when cash is going to leave the building based on purchasing. That's an example of a migration from entering invoices to a resource that adds a tremendous amount of value and talent to your organization. So that's just one example of how we're seeing in our world that those resources are adding more value, and it's a different skill set, or again, it requires training or budgetary items to help provide those capabilities to your organization. In accounts payable, really, when you think about it, the repetitive nature of the business, where you're dealing with manual invoicing and manual processing, that's really a department that has an opportunity to improve dramatically. And so what we wanted to do today at Corcentric is we just wanted to share with you from our experience 8 different ways that we can see that automation can help you. It can help with your career, it can help you with automation, and it's a great way to win the war on the talent pool to take those resources and really maximize the value that you're generating for your organization. We could probably list a dozen different capabilities in a dozen different areas that we thought we would offer to share with you today, but today we limited it to 8 items. And so let's start with the first one. This is the most popular and most common from what we see, and that's really the reduction of paper. So many different companies are inundated with paper, not only with their suppliers, but also check processing. I had the opportunity over the last few days to attend some conferences overall in the West Coast, and the question was asked, how many of you are dealing with the majority of paper invoices? And the predominant response from the audience was 100%. Almost every hand in those attendees raised the concern that they're dealing with so much paper. So our first comment to you is, let's spend less time dealing with paper. Let's try to figure out a way to move you to be automatic and electronic. So when you think about it, when you're looking for, let's say you're searching for a particular invoice or maybe a payment that was manually generated, can you imagine having to go through and look through a manila folder versus having a search button? I mean, it's that simple as an example. But today, so many companies that are dealing with paper are actually filing it and manually going through it. So they're wasting time. They're wasting time looking through paper. They're wasting time looking for information that maybe was not processed as efficiently as it could. And so it's a lack of time. It's a lack of adoption of getting you those transactions in an electronic format, which provides much greater efficiencies. So that's the first one. That's the one we hear the most, and that's one where we've seen our clients able to digitize 100% of their transactions. So let's stop wasting time looking for documents and let's become electronic. What else do we see? Number 2. How about if you spend less time on menial tasks and more time on value added? A couple of examples. If you can spend time, perhaps you're studying, I'll just throw an example out, maybe your suppliers. And with the data analysis and looking through your suppliers, you are able to determine certain trends. Maybe it's seasonality type trends, or maybe it's pricing trends, or maybe it's consolidation opportunities. I would suggest today that if you're focusing your time primarily on number 1, dealing with the paper, it's less likely that you have the capability and the time really to deal with these analyses and contributing factors to adding more value versus spending time on the task of entering the invoice. There's really no value that you're adding in an organization of keying in an invoice and processing it. That's limited value. I think if we can help streamline that and you become more electronic, those are just a few examples of how that repetitive transaction processing task can be elevated to something that's more meaningful for you as well as your organization. And also, there's a side benefit, and it's a health improvement because we're going to eliminate those paper cuts. You don't really want to deal with all the paper and processing those manual invoicing. Let's take advantage of electronic processing. I know clients today that the day that they hit enter on their system for a purchase order, that is the last time anything is touched manually. Because what happens is that purchase order is delivered to the supplier electronically. The supplier is able to fulfill that order, and they're able to invoice perhaps electronically, or even if they use the portal, it's the supplier entering the information, not the buyer. So that information from the invoice side is now processed to the buyer. It's electronic. It gets matched up with a 3-way match for the order, invoice, receipt. With STP, or straight through processing, that invoice is able to get sent to the ERP system. It's able to get processed. It sends a digital transaction for payment. When the payment is due, that payment is electronic and the money flows into the supplier's account. That's entirely paperless. There's no reason for paper cuts, and there's no reason for dealing with those paper invoices. The other advantage there is that the employees that are dealing with that, once again, you can provide additional value to your organization and avoid those paper cuts and become more electronic. Another benefit that is a result of that process that I just described, it creates value for your suppliers. If I'm a supplier, there's really two things I want to know. I want to know, am I going to get paid? And I want to know, when am I going to get paid and how much? That's one of the things that I care about. So if you give me visibility and you allow me as a supplier to know I'm going to get paid and when and how much, that's great value. I like that. I'm not interested in calling the buyer trying to find out, am I going to get paid? When am I going to get paid? What happened? Where are the issues? Did you manually process my invoice? Tell me about your paper cuts as you work through my invoice processing. I just want to know if I'm going to get paid and when. So you can eliminate those stressful calls. As a matter of fact, fewer can be zero. There's really no reason your supplier needs to call you at all. If you give the suppliers the tools, the visibility, the capability, and here's a nice feature I've seen, which suppliers love. If you can tell them when the payment is scheduled, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you're paying your supplier earlier. Maybe your terms are net 30 or 75, whatever they are. If you can tell the supplier when they're going to get paid, not necessarily paying them earlier, unless you want to take advantage of cash discounts, which we'll talk about later today, then you can give that value to the supplier. They don't have to call you at all. So we're not only going to make your life easier, it's going to be less stress. We're going to eliminate those phone calls and give the suppliers what they really want. What else can we do for you in the accounts payable department? Well, we can help improve your value in the organization. And here's an example as we were talking about the payments to the supplier and the terms. In the example that I shared with perhaps you're paying the supplier in 30 days or 75 days, maybe you offer a cash discount. And this sounds very simple, but I've seen so many organizations struggle with this just because of the capabilities, not the concept. They understand intellectually the math that I'm going to run through in just a second. The challenge is the capabilities. So here's the math. If I'm offering a 2% discount to pay early in 10 days, as an example, then with net 30 days, that means there are 18 turns in the course of a year, right? So, because I'm giving up those additional 20 days. So 18 times 2% is 36. That's a 36% roughly calculated APR. So if I'm processing $1 million, the 36% APR is $360,000. Why wouldn't I do that all day, every day? With today's rates, that's an extraordinary ROI. The problem that I've seen and witnessed in the marketplace, it's not the math, they get that. The problem generally is the ability to perfect that transaction within the 10-day cycle. Particularly if you're putting Band-Aids on every day and dealing with your paper cuts, you're very unlikely to be able to process those invoices electronically and streamline that process. What's going to happen is when it comes time to pay that invoice, by the time the order and the receipt and that manual invoice were processed and matched and you dug through your folders, you're going to exceed the 10 days. Guess what? You've missed the opportunity for the cash discount. You just lost that 36% APR or $360,000 on the million. Why? Because it wasn't automated. Let's take a look and a glance at what you might look like within your department if you are capturing those discounts. And again, we see top performers that are dramatically providing improvements to a 7x factor to their competitors when they're able to take advantage of this. So can you imagine now going to your CFO or going to your treasurer and saying, we've been able to streamline our process. We are in an environment where we're creating STP, straight through processing. And the big advantage, one of the many big advantages of that, is when that invoice comes in and we process and we match and we validate against our receipt and we electronically send that information into for payments, we're able to do that below the 10 days, take advantage of the cash discount. On the $1 million, we just added $360,000 to the bottom line. I'm pretty sure your perceived value is going to increase. Your CFO, your treasurer, they're going to like that. And that's something you have the ability to contribute almost single-handedly if you can address those issues from processing manual invoices to electronic. Many of your competitors are doing that, and they're gaining that 7 times factor of improvement compared to those who aren't able to take advantage of those opportunities. What else can we see, and what else can we do to help improve your life? Well, first of all, there's a lot of tools out there that make your life more simple. When you take an example that I just described where that invoice gets processed pretty much through the financial supply chain, and it gets integrated into your ERP, that's a seamless process. That's a straight through process. So the fact that you might have to today record that information through pivot tables or Excel spreadsheets or whatever complex tools you're using, it's far better if you can take advantage of that digital signal all the way through your financial supply chain with a seamless integration into your ERP. It provides the visibility that you need, the reporting, not just to you, but your other departments, perhaps procurement, negotiating rates with your suppliers, looking at their delivery times and their payment and their process gives you a report card. So when you can integrate that to your existing ERP systems, the ability there is that those tools that you've already purchased can certainly take advantage of the information that you need for reporting within your organization. It also gives visibility for your suppliers as well as from yourself. That leads us into the next point. When you're in an environment where you're able to report that information, you can share the benefits of straight-through processing. You can look at your contribution margin as an organization and share the way that you are improving the productivity. Let me give you an example. Let's say today you're working really hard and you're sustaining those paper cuts and you're cranking out 1,000 invoices a month. You're keying like, the most aggressive way that you possibly can, and you're contributing about 12,000 invoices a year. That's a lot of manual effort and a lot of hard work. Let's shift that over into an electronic model where we can take advantage of some straight-through processing functionality. We've seen clients improve 5 to 10 times at that level. I'm just going to use 5 as an example here today. So now, let's say, through straight-through processing, you're processing 5,000 invoices a month. And that's very positive and very likely because the transactions are following your business rules that you've established. You're still overseeing that function. You're managing that function. And so now you are contributing 60,000 invoices a year. That's a 5 times productivity improvement. What do you think your team members or your leadership is going to think if your team can perform 5 times faster? I think it's time for an increase. I think it's time for more responsibility and a raise and all the other good things that come along with that, so that allows you to take advantage of that improved productivity. It will improve your performance and where you stand with the organization. The other side that will gain the attention of your executive team is the cost reductions. And that is the cost, in that example that I used, processing those invoices, we have seen a staggering delta between those companies that process manually, $12.90, to those that process electronically at $1.77. That's an 86% difference, $11.13 difference for processing those invoices. So can you imagine the cost of that manual process that's inefficient? It's ineffective, not adding value, it's costly, and it's a dramatic difference. So think about taking the time that we described for the straight-through processing, where you went from 1,000 invoices a month to 5,000. You went from $12.90 down to $1.77. Think about how that is going to be an impact into your organization. Not only is your throughput dramatically increased, the cost per transaction is dramatically decreased. The ability to take advantage of the cash discount, in the example where you're processing those 1,000 to 5,000, not only are you doing more with less, you're taking advantage of the cash discount. So that $1 million at 36% APR is another $360,000. So wow, think of what you're adding to your organization. You're adding cash discounts, you're reducing the cost, you're increasing the throughput. I don't see how you lose on those. Those are just three wonderful ways that you can help improve your organization, improve your contribution, and improve the value that you're adding to your organization as well. So let's just take a couple of minutes here as we're kind of getting close to the end of our time today. Let's kind of just review a few things, and I have a few more slides just to kind of help you with this as you leave today wondering, how can I help my organization and how can I help me? Well, the items that we talked about, really, if I were to summarize them, I would say the time that you're wasting on manual documents, you really need to look at that. I would encourage you, when we're done today, pick a day during the week that you do invoice processing. Perhaps it's every day. But calculate the time. Really take a close look at it and say, how much time am I really spending what I would consider not as valuable of a contributor to your organization as you could be? How much time are you spending processing those manual invoices? And then I would also look at the second point that we talked about today. I would look at how many of those tasks that you're processing are considered repetitive. Are you doing those things over and over again? And if you are, how many of those functions that you're manually processing are contributing to those paper cuts? Because we want to get rid of those paper cuts. We want to stop that. And how many calls? Think about over the course of a week. Log this information. How many times are you getting calls from your suppliers where the information that you could provide to them, if it was visible, if they knew when you processed the invoice, if they knew that it was acknowledged, if they knew they were going to get paid, when and how much, how many phone calls could you eliminate? Could we completely eliminate them if we were to enable our suppliers? I would track that as well. I would also look at ways where you can add value into your AP department with the information we talked about, perhaps with forecasting payments, forecasting the spend for your suppliers, the visibility that you can provide with better tools. Those spreadsheets that we talked about versus using some of the better tools that integrate directly to your ERP systems, that visibility can provide more value for you, your organization, as well as your suppliers. When you bundle those 6 items that we talked about, number 7 was talking about improving your position in accounts payable, putting you more in a leadership position, one where you're contributing as a knowledge worker and less as a line worker. You're adding that value to your organization, and finally, you're reducing those costs from the staggering $12.90 that we said to $1.77. So now you're freeing up cash, you're improving the processing time, you're improving the throughput, you're increasing your cash discounts, and overall, I'd say that's a dramatic improvement to your accounts payable department. So finally, as we get towards the end here, just a couple of slides. I've got 2 more slides just to share with you. And that is what we have seen is that businesses that really have approached this in a way where they want to provide the impact to the organization, they really have increased their productivity and they've reduced their turnover. When you take employees and you invest in them and you help them to contribute more, and they know they're adding more value, and they know they're more productive, and they increase their performance, guess what? They're a happier worker, they are contributing more, and they're less likely to leave. Cost of turnover is very high. The training and the time and the onboarding and the education is an expensive proposition to your business. So the more you can invest in your current resources, like we said on the very first slide, with education, with tools, with better processes, with improved environments. All those things will help add to your productivity and to the productivity of your employees. At the end of the day, what we have seen mostly is we've seen that automation really helps the accounts payable departments that we work with not only attract, but also retain the type of people that we want in our environment. That digital environment is an exciting environment to be part of. Our clients that use our services, they love the fact that those invoices are electronic. There is no paper. There are no paper cuts. It is streamlined. It's electronic. With a click of a button, you can get the reporting on every transaction you ever wanted. That's a way better work environment to be in. You're going to get better people. You're going to have better staff members. You're going to have an increased visibility. Your suppliers are going to be happier. You're going to improve your cash flow. Your overall business is going to be improved because you're going to be able to make better decisions. Electronic data provides the ability to allow you to provide that analysis so that you can make smarter decisions for you, for your suppliers, and for your AP professionals. We want you to elevate your career. We want you to be able to add more value to your organization. We want you to be able to contribute in such a great way that that accounts payable department that you're in is looked at by your CFO to say, wow, this is one of the strengths of our organization. It's actually a differentiator. Many companies today might think AP is just a function. It's a necessary function within an organization. How about if you make yours a competitive differentiator? How about if you say our accounts payable department is one that is better than many of the other organizations and we add more value? Now you're an organization that's contributing at a greater capacity and adding an increased value for yourself as that AP professional. I think we have a minute or two left. If there is an opportunity for any questions, we can either take those questions online, or what we'll probably do is have you submit them, and we'll certainly follow up with any comments or questions that you might have. I'm going to turn it over to Mike now as we get ready to wrap it up for today. And again, I want to thank you for the time that you spent with us, and we hope that our contribution to you is one that allows you to improve your talent war that you're fighting to improve the visibility for you and your organization within accounts payable.
Great, thanks, Dan. Great information today. It looks like we are running up on time here. I do have one question that hopefully you can get in here. There's a couple more but I think we can get this one. Some of our suppliers are resistant to move to electronic invoicing. Any tips to convince them to do it rather than sending a PDF through an email?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the best way to allow your suppliers to participate is really explain to them the value. If you're a supplier, you're on the opposite end of accounts payable, you're on accounts receivable. So if you can help the supplier understand that they'll gain that visibility, they're not interested in calling you for whether or not they're going to get paid. They don't want to do that. That's a waste of their time as well. They get the reciprocal of the benefits that we talked about. So I think part of the value is explaining the visibility, explaining the fact that it'll be accurate, the fact that they'll be paid on time, the fact that they'll know that and see it and can plan for it. That's of great value. That's usually, in our experience, that's more than enough value for the supplier to say, I'm happy to participate in electronic invoicing because I understand the benefits for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. And looks like we are right up at time. So with that, any other questions, we will certainly get back to you within the next 24 hours, if not sooner. Thank you, everyone, for attending our webinar this month, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great day.